They called security before she even had a chance to speak a word. No warning, no explanation, just two security officers walking directly toward a black woman standing in line, holding a first-class ticket. The agent at the counter didn't even glance at the ticket. Didn't need to. She simply said coldly, "Step aside, please." That sentence, brief but heavy, carried the weight of accusation, as if she were an intruder, not a passenger. As she was quietly pulled out of line, the people around her watched, not to defend, just to confirm, because in their eyes she didn't look like someone who belonged in seat 2A, not with that skin, not with that silence, and certainly not with that unsettling calm. But here's what no one knew. Not the airline staff, not the smirking supervisor behind the counter, and definitely not the man who walked past her without needing to show his ID. The woman they had just tried to remove hadn't bought a first-class ticket. She had bought something else, something much bigger. And once you know what it was, you'll understand why no one on that flight could see things the same again. This isn't just a story about skin color. This is a story about power. The quiet kind, hidden behind indifferent stares. The kind of power that people don't even realize they're standing in front of. So ask yourself, what happens when the person you try to silence is the one who owns that silence? Who is she? Why didn't she resist? And what was her real purpose? What do you think? Drop your theories in the comments. Where are you watching from? And if you believe that justice doesn't always need to shout to be heard, don't forget to subscribe. You'll want to be here when the truth lands. "All right, go ahead," Kyle said, but as Autumn passed, he leaned slightly and muttered to his coworker, just loud enough for her to hear, thought she was lost. The other chuckled, a laugh dripping with disdain. Autumn kept walking, unfazed, but things didn't get any better at the security checkpoint. Even though her ticket clearly marked TSA pre-check, a trusted traveler's sign, she was still asked to stop. "Random screening," one agent said quietly, motioning her to the side table. They opened her tote, rummaging through every item, a few travel-size cosmetic bottles, a book, a sealed envelope, and a folder tied with a red string. When they reached the envelope, the officer paused. "What's this? Legal documents?" Autumn answered calmly, "Private." "Are you a lawyer?" he asked, flipping the envelope back and forth. "Not exactly," she replied shortly. After a few seconds of hesitation, the agent shrugged and led her through. Behind her, the line kept moving. Suited men, couples dragging designer luggage, an elderly woman wearing a diamond necklace that sparkled under the overhead lights. Autumn saw it all and recognized the pattern. But she didn't react. She was used to it. How the system always double-checks those who don't fit the mold, the biases trailing like shadows under fluorescent lights. She arrived at gate C9 well before boarding time, choosing a seat tucked in a quiet corner of the waiting area. No scrolling, no calls, no messages. She just set her bag beside her, pulled out the sealed envelope, and rested it on her lap. What was inside? A financial transfer plan, critical to one of the biggest airline mergers in North America. She didn't look like someone in power, but she was the final voice of authority. A baby in a nearby stroller stared at her. Autumn gave a soft, warm smile. The mother glanced up, met her eyes, and immediately turned the stroller away. Autumn exhaled gently and leaned back in her chair. The loudspeaker came on. "Now boarding, Flight 237 to Boston. Remaining passengers, please proceed to gate C12. She watched the gate agent, the cheerful smile for the man with the briefcase, the polite wave to the woman carrying a golden retriever in a shoulder bag. Yes, it was a confirmed golden retriever. Here, politeness was distributed by rank, just like seat assignments. She knew exactly where she stood in that invisible system. But she wasn't bothered. She hadn't come here for comfort. She came to observe, to test, to confirm a theory. 3 years ago, she received a letter, a trust fund, with one unusual clause. Her approval was required to move into the next investment phase of a major transportation conglomerate. But the law firm overseeing the deal made a strange request. They wanted Autumn to take one of the flights herself, undercover. "Let them think you're nobody," the senior partner said. "Let's see how they treat you when they believe you have no value." And so here she was. An announcement broke her thoughts. "Now boarding Group 1, Flight 1187 to Denver, first class and executive platinum passengers. Please proceed to the gate." Autumn rose and calmly joined the line. A man 2 spots ahead glanced back at her, then turned to the gate agent, as if to confirm whether she truly belonged there. When it was her turn, the agent gave her a cursory glance, then said in a flat voice, "Ma'am, this is boarding for first class and executive platinum passengers now." Autumn held out her ticket again. "Seat 2A, she said softly. The agent blinked, scanned the code, and forced a strained smile. "Go ahead," she said. As Autumn stepped onto the jet bridge, she could feel the eyes behind her fixed on her back. She didn't look like someone who belonged in first class. She didn't act like she needed to be there. And that's exactly what she wanted. At seat 2A, she sat down slowly, tucking the sealed envelope discreetly into the seat back pocket in front of her, like an anchor holding her steady against the undertow of assumptions. The man seated next to her, wearing a gray blazer and designer glasses, gave her a polite nod, then returned to his tablet, absorbed in work. The sound of the cabin door closing echoed through the plane, a heavy thunk, like a statement that the order of things was now locked in place, determined by seat assignments, not human worth. Autumn sat by the window, her small fabric bag tucked beneath the seat in front. The envelope still rested on her lap. Not just documents, but latent power. She didn't need to flaunt it. Her presence was enough. A flight attendant with her hair neatly pinned up, name tag reading Sloan, walked by, her glance flicking briefly to Autumn's row. Her smile wasn't warm, it was rehearsed. "Good morning," she said in a flat, emotionless tone. Autumn nodded politely. No response came back. A few minutes later, a cabin supervisor appeared with a clipboard in hand and whispered something to Sloan as they passed by Autumn's row. Both cast a quick glance her way before continuing toward the cockpit. No raised voices, just a look, a gesture, enough to reveal that bias still lived quietly beneath the surface. The plane began to taxi. Autumn felt the atmosphere shift, not dramatically, but perceptibly. Passengers in row 1 were offered drinks. So were those in row 3. Row 2, her row, was skipped. Sloan passed by her twice. Each time she was courteous to others, but never once looked at Autumn, as if she wasn't there, as if the system had silently flagged her as not to be served. Have you ever felt invisible like that? Not because you lack the means, but because others decided you lack the look. If you've experienced it, share in the comments. You're not alone. Autumn kept her gaze out the window, her fingertips lightly resting on the edge of the envelope, but inside, her mind was razor sharp. Not a single move escaped her notice. In a world built on control, power often hides in the smallest decisions, and right now, someone had decided she wasn't to be seen, heard, or acknowledged. When the drink cart rolled down the aisle after takeoff, Sloan stood stiffly nearby as a younger attendant asked Autumn what she'd like. "Just water, please," Autumn replied calmly. The young attendant hesitated, then leaned down and whispered something to Sloan. Sloan whispered back, then turned to Autumn with a paper-thin smile. "I'm sorry, but your fare class doesn't include complimentary beverages." Autumn raised an eyebrow, not with anger, just a question as soft as a breeze. "Even in first class?" Sloan blinked, looked down at the passenger manifest, and hesitated. "I'll double-check with the cabin supervisor," she said quickly, then walked away, leaving a chill in her wake as curious glances followed. The man beside Autumn looked up, confused. "I thought first class came with free drinks," he asked aloud, not directing it to anyone in particular. Autumn didn't respond. A few people turned their heads. A baby began to cry. At first, it was a soft whimper, then quickly grew into full sobs. A flight attendant rushed over with a warm smile, offering a blanket, even offering to warm the bottle for the mother. The contrast stung. Not because Autumn sought pampering, but because the entire hospitality performance was being selectively rewritten right in front of her to exclude her from the script. Minutes later, another flight attendant returned with warm towels, handing one to the man next to Autumn, asking gently if he needed anything else. He shook his head. Autumn wasn't asked. Not a single word, not a single glance. She sat still, her hand resting on the envelope, as if holding on to something that threatened to slip from her grasp. Its weight now seemed doubled. Not just documents, but the full architecture of power laid bare. She didn't know exactly who was behind this flight, but she understood systems. And she recognized the familiar pattern. Power doesn't test you when you shout. It tests you when you're silent. And right now they thought her silence meant defeat. But they were wrong. About halfway through the flight, the cabin manager, a tall man named Bryce, approached the row, bent slightly, and asked to see her ticket again. "We've received a seating discrepancy notice from the ground," he said bluntly. "Would you mind if I rescan your ticket?" Autumn unlocked her phone and held it out. Bryce stared at the screen longer than necessary. Then, with a strange expression, he said, "That's odd. Must be a system error. I'll make a note of it." No apology, no explanation, just an invisible glitch conveniently covering for visible discrimination. As he walked away, Sloane returned almost immediately, her smile now absurdly bright. "We've updated your file," she said, as if the file had been the issue all along. Then, in a lower voice, "Let us know if you need anything." But Autumn didn't respond. She turned her head to look out the window, where clouds drifted apart and came together again, like cells under a microscope. She'd flown this route before, years ago, when she was just a teenage girl, traveling far from home for the first time to attend a relative's funeral on the other side of the country. Have you ever returned to a familiar place, only to find everything different because you had changed? That girl had once sat in coach, quietly grieving, but the woman in this seat today, still silent, was quiet for an entirely different reason. That trip had changed Autumn's life. It was the first time she understood that respect is never handed to you. It's something the world only considers offering after it believes you've endured enough. And sometimes, even after you've endured, the answer is still no. That memory lingered now, like smoke, still there, but hazy. As the seatbelt sign dinged back on, Sloane returned to Autumn's row, bending slightly with a voice that sounded memorized. "I'm sorry, but it seems your seat was reassigned during boarding. Would you mind moving to seat 17D? We need to balance the weight." Autumn turned to look at her, her gaze as sharp as a scalpel. "Weight distribution?" she repeated, calm and even. "That's the reason?" Sloane nodded, her smile stiff. "Yes, ma'am. Just a technical procedure." Autumn said nothing more. She leaned back in her seat and replied in a low, resolute voice, "I'll stay right here." Sloane's smile froze. She opened her mouth to say something else, but before she could, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting mild turbulence. Please remain seated and keep your seat belts fastened." Autumn exhaled slowly. No one asked her to move again. And in a twist of irony, the turbulence never came. Time moved slowly. Passengers napped, typed, whispered. But Autumn, still silent, never touched the envelope. She knew the real storm wouldn't come from the skies. It would rise from the very ground they believed they stood firmly upon. The cabin noise settled into a mechanical lull. Most passengers tuned out, losing themselves in sleep, light movies, or overpriced audiobooks. But not Autumn Riley. She missed nothing. She was recording, not with pen and paper, but with the memory of someone who'd long learned to read the weight of glances, the careful curation of language, the calculated omissions. Silence, to her, was never empty. It was full of choices. And the choices being made around her were no accident. They were practiced, deliberate, Worse, they were executed with ease. Sloane returned again. This time she carried a tray of hot towels on a gleaming silver cart. "Welcome," she said to row 1, then to row 3, even row 4 behind them. "Autumn's row?" Skipped. As if it didn't exist. No explanation, no eye contact, not even the most basic gesture. The man beside her had long since buried himself in his work, perhaps too uncomfortable to look, or too used to the kind of luxury service that depends on someone else's silence. Autumn never asked for a towel. She never had. She simply sat there, quiet, watching the cart pass like a ghost, uninterested in visiting the living. 20 minutes later, the smell of toasted bread filled the cabin. First-class meal service had begun. The metal carts rolled out between rows, draped in white linen to give the illusion of elegance. But Autumn knew better. She knew the choreography. Heat, display, clear away. This time, Sloane returned, holding a menu, her smile stiff, as if it had been coded into her. She stopped at seat 2B, opened the menu with a theatrical flourish as though attending to royalty. She jotted something down in her small notepad, then walked right past Autumn, as if she were nothing more than a forgotten coat slung over the armrest. The cart rolled on. No menu, no question. Autumn waited. She counted 1, 2, 3 rows served before she cleared her throat gently. Sloane turned but didn't step closer. "Have I been skipped for lunch service?" Autumn asked, her voice low but clear, solid as stone. Sloane stepped back toward her, moving slowly, as if acting out a scene. "Oh, I'm not sure you're on the service list," she said, with a laugh that blended insincerity with condescension. "Sometimes these lists get complicated." Autumn tilted her head slightly, her eyes gleaming like blades. "I like complicated." Her voice wasn't raised, but her eyes said everything. Sloane hesitated, then this time actually looked at the manifest as if she needed to convince herself. "Ah, yes," she nodded quickly. "Would you like the herb roasted chicken or the miso cod?" "The cod," Autumn said, not bothering to look at her. "Coming right up," Sloane replied, then disappeared, as if she'd never existed. 15 minutes later, the meal tray arrived. The fish was lukewarm, the vegetables limp, the rice soft, but improperly made. Autumn didn't touch it. She closed the lid, pushed the tray slightly forward, and returned her focus to the envelope. Still unopened, but growing heavier by the minute. Not because of the paper, but because of what it represented. Across the aisle, a passenger requested another drink. A flight attendant appeared instantly. Autumn watched, like a scientist observing a lab test, not with envy, but with exacting clarity. At 33, she no longer wished to be accepted. What she wanted now was to see what people would do when they believed they no longer had to pretend. And then, the moment that defined the entire atmosphere of the cabin happened. A man, around 60, wearing khakis and expensive headphones, walked down from row 5. He braced himself on Autumn's seat, as if leaning on public property. "Hey," he called out to Sloane, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's in first class?" He didn't look at Autumn. The question wasn't for her. It was a statement in disguise. Sloane gave a small laugh, just audible enough for the nearby passengers to hear, but not loud enough to be reprimanded. "She's on the manifest," she said, breezing past. "Probably used miles or something." The man scoffed, patted the top of the seat twice, and walked back to his row. Autumn didn't flinch. Her heart didn't race, but her fingers curled slightly tighter around the edge of the envelope. If she had spoken in that moment, she wasn't sure she could have remained calm. And she needed calm for what was coming next. When the trays were cleared, a different flight attendant, a younger one, newer, less polished, approached. He bent slightly, touched the tray, then paused. "Not a fan of the cod?" he asked hesitantly. Autumn looked at him, her expression polite but unreadable. "It was cold." He nodded, muttered something like, "sorry," and wheeled the cart away. Seconds later, Autumn saw him say something to Sloane. Sloane immediately glanced toward row 2, not with guilt, but with irritation. Autumn saw it all. From that moment forward, Sloane stopped smiling for the rest of the flight. Finally, the captain's voice came over the intercom announcing their descent. Most passengers were dozing or lost in their headphones, but Autumn remained fully awake. She had never trusted ease, especially in spaces designed to make you believe in it. Sloane walked the aisle for a final seatbelt check. When she reached row 2, her eyes fell on the fabric bag beneath Autumn's seat. "Just a reminder," she said curtly. "No smile, no expression. Did you notice? The line between courtesy and contempt is sometimes just a glance. And here, every look proved that power wasn't in the ticket, but in who decided you deserved the seat. Please store all carry-ons properly for landing," Sloane said, her voice hollow. Autumn looked her dead in the eye, calm. "I've flown before." Sloane didn't reply. She turned away. The landing was smooth, a single rumble. Autumn reached for the envelope, sensing the moment approaching. She didn't have to speak, didn't need to. Every skip towel, every averted glance, every one-sided policy had already spoken for her. Loud and clear, as the plane taxied toward gate 32, she felt it. Not anger, not fear, but the cold certainty of confirmation. She waited until the seatbelt sign went off, then bent down, retrieved the envelope, but didn't rush. Passengers scrambled to gather their belongings, crowding the aisle, bumping into each other with laptop bags and duty-free items. Autumn stayed seated. She pulled the envelope close, like cradling a fragile artifact. The seal was still intact, the red wax catching the cabin light with a faint shimmer. A small movement caught her attention. Sloane stood at the front of the cabin, watching her. No more pretending. The performance of customer service was over. The flight had ended. What remained was the raw edge of an unbalanced power dynamic. Autumn waited until the crowd had thinned before standing. She slung her bag over her shoulder, envelope in hand. Her steps were steady, deliberate. At the aircraft door, the captain stood as a courtesy to first-class passengers, greeting each one with a smile. When Autumn approached, that smile hesitated. "Safe travels," he said. But it faltered. Autumn gave a brief nod, didn't reply. She stepped into the jet bridge, the cold gust of air hitting her like a scene transition. Halfway down the corridor, a uniformed airport employee appeared in front of her. "Miss Riley?" the man asked, clipboard in hand, an earpiece tucked into one ear. Autumn didn't blink. "Yes," he nodded politely. "We've received a request to verify your final destination before releasing your luggage. Just a routine check." Autumn's lips twitched, more disbelief than amusement. "You need to verify where I'm going," she repeated. He glanced at his sheet. "Yes, ma'am. It seems your profile was flagged with status code 19B. It requires internal confirmation." Autumn stepped forward, her voice sharp as a scalpel. "Who flagged it?" He hesitated. "It doesn't say. Might be an automated system." "No, it's not," she cut in, her voice level and cold. "Take me to whoever is responsible for this." The man fumbled for a moment, then motioned toward a side corridor, away from the main terminal. "This way, Mom." Autumn followed the man down a narrow hallway lined with industrial carpet, flanked by drab gray storage doors. The stale scent of disinfectant hung in the air, unsettling in its artificial sterility. At the end of the hallway was a small room labeled Operations Holding 3B. The door was already open. Inside was a desk, 2 monitors, and a printer. A woman in a black blazer sat behind the desk. She didn't stand to greet them. Her nameplate read, "Ground Liaison Supervisor." "Mrs. Riley," she said crisply without ceremony, "we've found an irregularity in your file. It appears your seat was reassigned mid-flight due to an internal audit," Turner said, her eyes fixed on the screen. "The system marked your ticket as economy class, possibly due to an upgrade error." Autumn gently placed the envelope on the desk, still sealed. "Irregularity? In what sense?" she asked, her tone cool and metallic. Turner tapped a few keys, then replied, "Your ticket was issued through a legacy voucher, part of a discontinued loyalty program no longer recognized by the current system." Autumn raised an eyebrow. "So your system no longer recognizes its own assets?" Turner paused. "Some legacy programs have been subject to abuse. There have been cases of counterfeit vouchers from third-party resellers." Autumn didn't move, but she felt the weight of the accusation, wrapped in professional phrasing. "You're suggesting I committed fraud to sit in a seat I paid for?" Turner straightened, her tone now defensive. "We're not accusing you of anything, ma'am. We're simply protecting the integrity of operational procedures." Autumn was silent for a moment, then reached into her fabric bag and pulled out a small black leather wallet. From it she removed a thin metal card. Not a bank card, but a verification pass, embossed in platinum, with a serial number. Turner blinked at the card, then looked up. "I'm sorry, what is this?" "Access verification," Autumn replied. "Level 4, under the authority of Eastnun Financial Holdings." The staff member standing beside her went stiff. Turner frowned. "That's a private equity firm?" "No," Autumn cut in, opening the envelope and pulling out a document with a shimmering embossed header under the overhead light. "That is the parent company holding a 41% stake in your airline's pending merger." He held the document up, showing Turner the seal, signature, and date. "This is a legally binding disclosure agreement. I am the witness and final signatory before the trust clause is activated." The room shifted, not in temperature but in atmosphere. The tension transformed, as if everyone realized the person they had tried to brush aside was the one holding the key. Turner's mouth opened slightly. "I wasn't informed." "Of course you weren't," Autumn interrupted. "Because this isn't a public rollout, this is a live audit, an anonymous interaction initiated by the only party authorized to confirm the trust clause. I didn't come here to be treated differently. I came to observe." Silence engulfed the room. The airport staffer beside her shifted his stance, clearly reassessing everything that had happened over the last 6 hours. Turner sat up straight again, but this time out of courtesy, not authority. "Miss Riley, we'd like to offer—" "No," Autumn said sharply. "You're not offering anything. You're reporting everything." He turned to the staffer. "Where's my bag?" He stammered. "Holding area, section D2, ma'am. I can take you there." Autumn nodded, reclaimed her envelope and verification card, and walked out of the room without another word. The hallway felt colder now, the sterile air seeping into her skin. The staffer followed behind, murmuring into his earpiece as they made their way to baggage. When they arrived, the carousel was already empty. In the corner, her fabric bag sat beside a steel crate marked with a yellow tag, as though it had once been considered suspicious. She walked over, picked it up, and stood tall. No need for confirmation, no explanation required. All she needed was for the truth to be acknowledged. A sticker on the bag read, "Unverified item, access restricted." Autumn lifted it without a word. The zipper was half open. She checked the documents inside. The pages were slightly bent, none missing, but clearly disturbed. She looked directly at the staffer. "Was this bag opened?" "A break? I don't know, ma'am. Per protocol, it shouldn't have been." Autumn zipped it shut, slung it over her shoulder. Her voice was firm. "Call your supervisor." He nodded and stepped away. Autumn turned, her eyes locking on a small window at the end of the hall, where the runway came into view. Every 3 minutes, a plane took off. Outside, everything looked orderly, but she knew the real turbulence had already occurred. Beneath the surface, inside system code, behind service smiles, and within all those carefully scripted ma'ams meant to mask the truth that people always think they have control over someone, when that someone doesn't look like them. She knew she couldn't fix the system with a single flight, but she also knew this corridor, with its industrial gray walls, flickering fluorescent lights, and lingering scent of disinfectant, had witnessed far too many "we're sorry," with no one ever held accountable. Autumn stood there alone, her grip on her bag strap tighter than she realized. Her breathing was steady, but her mind was no longer at ease. It had shifted into focus mode. Footsteps echoed before she saw the man. He wore a navy blue suit, a polished silver name tag catching the light. Eric Dempsey, Director of Oversight. He extended a hand. She didn't take it. Autumn simply looked him in the eye. Not hostile, but not the slightest bit warm. "Did you open my bag?" Eric's smile faltered for a beat, then returned. Professional, rehearsed. "We had to ensure the contents didn't pose a safety risk. It was a sealed envelope with a legal insignia," she replied flatly. "Is that the threat you're referring to?" Eric gestured toward a small private room nearby. "Would you mind stepping in there so we can clarify a few things?" Autumn didn't move. "You mean, so you can control the narrative in a closed space?" Eric blinked, cleared his throat. "The system flagged you as a passenger of concern for declining a seat reassignment?" Autumn's voice was low, steady, cutting like a blade through ice. Eric hesitated. "There were reports that your tone toward the crew was calm," Autumn finished for him. "Not compliant, possibly confrontational." Eric lowered his voice as he completed the sentence. "Per protocol, we're required to document such behavior in the flight record." Autumn stepped closer, locking eyes with him. "You're rewriting the truth," she said, "not because I was aggressive, but because I didn't yield." Eric looked away, clearly more interested in escaping the conversation than resolving it. "Miss Riley, we can file a report or we can let this go, but I recommend de-escalation." Autumn gave a faint, almost soundless laugh. "That's your favorite phrase, isn't it? De-escalate. You create the tension, then turn my response into the problem." Eric straightened his back, eyes narrowing. "If you're unhappy with the handling of this matter, you may submit a formal complaint through Customer Affairs." Autumn looked at him, not with anger, but with a declaration in her gaze. "I am the memo you're trying to suppress." Her expression didn't shift. "You mean the same department that filed a misleading report within 5 minutes of my landing?" Eric said nothing. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He glanced at the screen, muttered, "Excuse me," and walked away. Faster than necessary, urgency showing in every step. Autumn watched him turn down another corridor and disappear. She exhaled slowly, then moved toward a row of empty seats tucked in the corner of the waiting area. The room was nearly deserted, just a few ground staff passing through and an older janitor mopping the floor. She sat down, placed the bag on her lap, and took out the file again. The paper's edges were bent. Someone had flipped through it. Perhaps not out of curiosity, but out of that careless entitlement that whispers, "This can't be important," because the person who owns it is. That certainty they carried about her worth was what always hurt more than the actions themselves, the belief that she could never possess anything more valuable than their assumptions. She unlocked her phone and opened the secure app connected to the trust's system. Her fingerprint unlocked the encryption. Within seconds, she pulled up a list of staff IDs flagged from various airport sectors. Submitted via anonymous reports, her name appeared once, flagged as non-compliant passenger. The code beneath it read 37C. She opened the details. The report was vague, almost intentionally so. Challenged authority, refused directives, raised voice, non-cooperative with movement requests, declined to present identification. None of it was true. But every word was just enough to justify the treatment she'd received. Not punishment, not discipline, erasure. Quiet or smooth, like she was never there. She closed the app, leaned back, resting her head against the cold wall behind her. Over the intercom, a voice called for passengers to retrieve luggage, staff to report to baggage areas. No one called her name. They didn't need to. She wasn't designed to be served here. She was designed to be erased, silently. The strategy was never confrontation. It was attrition. Slowly, piece by piece, they chipped away at her sense of value. Not with insults or shouting, but with a skipped napkin, an absent menu, a mislabeled system code. and a plate of cold fish. They never said she didn't belong, they just made her start to wonder. The double doors to the right opened. A man in a reflective vest walked in, clipboard in hand. "Miss Autumn Riley?" he asked. She nodded. "We've located your personal item," the man said, holding up a familiar file pouch. This time it was no longer sealed. It was found near a restroom area. Might have been dropped during handling. Autumn didn't flinch. "It wasn't dropped," she said quietly. "It was taken." The man blinked, clearly unsure, then placed the pouch on the table. "There's no way to verify that, ma'am. It wasn't logged in the system." "Exactly," Ota replied, rising to her feet. She opened the pouch. Nothing was missing, but the last page of the contract had a sharp crease running directly through the signature line, as if someone had folded it carelessly, without concern. Autumn smoothed the page and returned it carefully to the file, then looked up. Through the narrow window in the room, she saw 2 flight attendants walk by. One of them was Sloane. She wasn't smiling anymore. Her face was animated, recounting a familiar story. Disruptive passenger. Protocol interruption followed procedure at every step. Autumn watched. Not with anger, not with satisfaction, just silence. The same silence they had used to push her to the margins. But this time, she owned it. And in the right hands, silence could resound louder than any outburst. She stepped out of the room and re-entered the terminal. The gate she had arrived at now serviced a new flight. A different agent was scanning tickets, smiling at a group of well-dressed travelers. Autumn passed unnoticed, until she didn't. A voice called from behind her. "Miss Riley, 1 moment, please. We need to speak with you." She turned, her steps steady, the gait of someone who didn't want a scene but had no intention of shrinking from one either. The second trip to the restroom had been uneventful, no staggering, no interference, just a basic need after hours in the air. But when she returned and approached her seat, Sloane reappeared. No smile this time. Her tone was firm, icy, but still held that false courtesy, the kind typically used just before a reprimand. "Ms. Riley," she said loud enough for nearby rows to hear, "we'd appreciate if you remain seated for the remainder of the flight. Excessive movement can make other passengers uneasy." Autumn stared at her, unblinking. "Is there a regulation against using the restroom twice?" Sloane paused, carefully selecting her words. "Of course not, but certain behaviors can be misinterpreted." "By whom?" Autumn asked, her voice calm but unyielding. Sloane forced a thin smile. "We're just trying to maintain a stable environment." Autumn didn't respond. She sat down, buckled her seatbelt, and looked out the window. The aircraft began its descent. The seatbelt sign came on. Flight attendants prepared for landing. The intercom announced standard instructions delivered in a neutral, professional tone. But Autumn could see the shift in the crew's demeanor. Sloane kept glancing toward the front. Another attendant exchanged looks with her near the galley. A subtle nod, followed by a hushed whisper through the headset. Autumn's jaw tightened. She understood that language. It wasn't personal, it was procedural, and that's what made it more dangerous. Procedures didn't need malice to do harm, they just needed permission. And here, permission had been granted, easily. As the plane reached the gate and the seatbelt sign chimed off, 2 uniformed individuals stepped into the cabin. They weren't police, at least not officially, but they wore airport security badges. A different kind of authority, quieter, but just as absolute. They moved efficiently, scanning the front rows like they were checking off names. They stopped at row 2. "Ms. Riley," the taller one said. His voice was professional, neither cold nor warm. "We need you to step off the aircraft with us to verify some details." Autumn didn't rise right away. "Is there an issue with my ticket?" she asked, meeting his gaze. "No, ma'am," the second one replied. "We've been asked to follow up on a passenger report. It'll only take a moment." "What kind of report?" Autumn's voice was firm as steel. "There were some concerns regarding behavior during the flight," the first one clarified. "Specifically, movement during safety protocols, non-compliance with seat instructions, and perceived uncooperative interactions." Autumn stood slowly. "So, I'm being invited off for using the restroom and not accepting being ignored. No one is being detained, the agent replied. We're conducting a routine soft screening. The language was carefully chosen, innocuous sounding, but Autumn knew the truth behind it. She reached down to grab her bag. As she did, she caught Sloane watching from a distance, her expression concerned, but devoid of any genuine remorse. Other passengers pretended not to notice, but a few peeked over shoulders, stealing glances, feigning indifference while committing every detail to memory. Autumn slung the bag over her shoulder, pressing the envelope to her side, and followed the two men off the plane. The jet bridge was quiet, their footsteps echoing beneath the sterile fluorescence from the observation windows. One man walked ahead, the other kept pace beside her, no handcuffs, no physical force, just a polite escort, thinly veiled as professionalism but unmistakably about control. They stopped at a service door near the cleaning station. This way, one said, opening a private corridor. The walls were cold gray, lined with internal signage regular passengers would never see. At the end was a small room with frosted glass, 2 chairs and a table. A woman in a blazer sat behind it, typing. When they entered, she looked up. Miss Riley? I'm Officer Dana Reyes, post-landing compliance liaison. I'll need to see your identification. Autumn handed over her state ID and boarding pass. Reyes scanned them, her eyes flicking to the screen as data loaded. We've received an internal note from the cabin crew, not a formal report, just a flag, she said. It mentions non-compliance with procedure and causing discomfort to surrounding passengers. Autumn leaned forward slightly. Does it specify which passengers? No, ma'am, Reyes replied. For privacy reasons, they're not required to name anyone. So an anonymous accusation, Autumn concluded. And I get pulled into a private room with no opportunity to respond first? This isn't a detention room, Reyes said. We call it a supportive screening room. Autumn gave a faint laugh without looking up. Impressive phrasing. Almost sounds like hospitality. Reyes didn't respond. The door opened again. A man entered, mid-40s, no tie, holding a folder, face weary. Mrs. Riley, he said. I'm Paul Jennings, Customer Experience Oversight. I've reviewed the incident report and need to clarify a few points with you directly, Jennings said, trying to keep his voice even. Incident? Autumn echoed. I used the restroom and declined a cold meal. Jennings nodded, visibly uncomfortable. Yes, I believe that's where the log begins. But the language used in the report triggered a few automated protocols. Terms like non-compliant and verbally confrontational require additional review by the system. Autumn stared at him. So your system penalizes tone, not action? He hesitated. The system monitors for signals. And does it monitor signals from crew members who ignore, exclude, or humiliate passengers? She pressed. Jennings didn't respond. Does it track how my meal was served last, how my seat was challenged mid-flight, or how I was accused of making others uncomfortable? There's no entry for those, he admitted quietly. Autumn reached into her bag, pulled out the familiar envelope and set it on the table, not opening it, just placing it down as a silent statement. This document could affect every contract your airline holds with 3 regional financial firms, she said. I suggest you stop reading signals and start reading facts. Jennings looked down at the envelope. Reyes glanced between them. The air in the room thickened, like the moment before a storm. Autumn crossed her legs, deliberately slow. Her voice was cold, clear. You picked the wrong person to pull off that plane. No one spoke after that. The envelope lay untouched on the table like a silent warning. Yet Autumn's voice carried no anger, no plea. It was exactly where it belonged, steady, sharp, not with emotion, but with authority. Jennings glanced at Officer Reyes, who maintained a neutral expression, though she was clearly alert now. No one in the room dared speak first. Autumn let the silence linger, then slowly unzipped a hidden pocket in her bag. She pulled out a second envelope, smaller, sealed with red wax that shimmered under the fluorescent light. She placed it beside the first, her manicured fingertip brushing its surface. "This," she said, "is a legal directive signed by the East End Trust Board. It authorizes full intervention in any obstructive action, including detention, document access, or behavioral flagging outside procedural norms." Jennings blinked. I'm sorry, Eastern Trust?" Autumn's gaze locked onto his. "You know the name," she said, "and your airline's second-largest shareholder knows it even better. Read carefully before you touch me again." Officer Reyes leaned in to examine the wax seal, not yet daring to touch it. Jennings hesitated, then slowly picked up the envelope, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the micro-embossed emblem in the red wax. His expression shifted as the authenticity became undeniable. "This directive, is it active?" Jennings asked, his voice no longer steady. "Since this morning," Autumn replied, "the moment your crew attempted to reclassify my behavior. The directive went into effect immediately." Jennings gently set the envelope back down, as if handling explosives. He pulled out his phone, typed quickly, then looked at Reyes. "Would you notify the terminal supervisor? We may need to suspend all intervention here." Reyes nodded and exited the room without another word. Autumn leaned back in her chair. "I assume I've already been logged in your internal reporting system, whatever code you used, 37C82B. It won't hold. Starting now, your entire regional system is being audited on how those codes are assigned. Data models, demographic correlations, individual staff classification histories." Jennings rubbed his temple. "That's handled by another channel, and that channel," Autumn said, "now has my digital signature authorizing third-party forensic access." Her phone buzzed softly. Autumn unlocked it, opened a secure app, and turned the screen toward Jennings. The banner appeared across the top, "Directive active. Override status verified by Trust Board." Jennings swallowed hard. "This is well beyond this terminal now." "Yes," Autumn replied, her tone composed. "It goes wherever that pattern has spread." At that moment, the hallway outside filled with voices, footsteps, and the long ring of a phone. The door opened. Officer Reyes returned, her face tense, no longer neutral. Behind her stood an older officer, wearing a comm headset and holding a clipboard. He didn't bother looking at. "Ma'am?" He addressed Autumn directly. "We've just received an emergency directive from the airline's central legal office. You're to be released immediately, no further questioning. All pending classifications have been nullified, retroactively." Jennings stood. "Who issued that order?" The officer didn't blink. "Executive Legal Operations, with a duplicate sent to the Deputy Director of Regional Security." He glanced at his clipboard and read aloud. "Cease all action regarding passenger Autumn Riley. She is now under corporate-level protection and acting in a legally recognized trustee capacity." Autumn didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She simply stood, deliberate, silent, and reached for the envelope. The officer stepped aside to let her pass. Jennings stared at her, words caught in his throat. I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Autumn replied. "And that's the problem, isn't it?" He opened his mouth to say more, but no words came. Autumn turned to Reyes. "Am I free to return to the terminal?" "Of course, ma'am," Reyes replied quickly. "Would you like an escort?" "No," Autumn said. "I need space." She walked past them, each step slow, deliberate. She opened the door herself. Outside, the once empty corridor was no longer quiet. Two airport managers huddled near the security room door, whispering into their headsets. One of them met Autumn's gaze and immediately stepped aside. She passed without a word. The sound of her heels tapped lightly across the tile floor, a composed rhythm moving through the storm the system had stirred behind the scenes. Within seconds, her name was scrubbed from internal watch lists. Automated alerts were blocked before they reached local terminals. A global compliance advisory had been issued, warning that no further action could be taken against her without direct authorization from senior executive leadership. As Autumn re-entered the main concourse, she noticed the tension in the body language along Gate E. Uniformed staff moved with unusual urgency. A woman in a blazer whispered into her earpiece near the check-in desk. Another employee typed frantically into a back-end console behind the counter. Every movement said the same thing. The system had realized who she really was, and now it was scrambling to undo what it had done. It was rewriting its own behavior in real time, trying to salvage its credibility. She stopped by a digital service kiosk, pulled up her booking ticket, and saw her original first-class ticket reinstated, along with priority status and full lounge access across the terminal. Her name had been scrubbed clean of every stain, but the stain was never on her. It was on them. Behind her, a voice rose from the boarding area. "Wait, wasn't she the one who got pulled off the flight earlier?" "Yeah," someone replied. "Looks like they're fixing her seat now." Autumn didn't turn around. She didn't need to. She kept walking, not breaking the rhythm, but setting it. And as her phone lit up with a new encrypted message titled "Security Compliance Response Triggered," Autumn reached into her bag one last time. She retrieved a small, hard case, fingerprint locked. Inside was a secure terminal, lightweight, military-grade encryption, not available to retail or standard corporate buyers, but issued only to high-level trust delegates within financial investment networks. She activated it with a fingerprint scan and began the familiar sequence. Her thumb confirmed the silent trigger signal sent back to Genesis Transaction Oversight. The screen blinked. A green indicator appeared in the corner. Shareholder ID 9903 AU Verify Transactional Authority. Unlocked. Autumn didn't smile. She didn't need to. That confirmation wasn't just an acknowledgement. It was a digital signature of power. At that very moment, across the city, in a boardroom flooded with morning light and financial pressure, 3 directors from the Havenport Merger Committee stared at the alert flashing on their dashboard. Trust operative engagement triggered. Genesis Financial Transfer Rights, ARRR. They knew exactly what it meant. A $4,100,000,000 0 cents transaction, potentially restructuring regional airline ownership, required one final sign-off from the sole living heir of Genesis's founding family. That person was Autumn Riley. Autumn passed through the VIP lounge checkpoint with the same steady, unreadable expression she'd worn all morning. But this time, every scanner she passed recognized her with maximum priority. No more flashing red screens, no more questioning stares, not a moment's hesitation. The system responded before she even touched it. At the boarding gate, the agent glanced at his tablet, then stood upright immediately. "Mrs. Riley, would you like a private meeting suite or access to the executive lounge?" Autumn replied curtly. "No, just open a secure terminal and connect me to the compliance officer. I'll access login." He nodded, already entering the command. Behind her, the whispering had started again. This time from the very people who once mistook her silence for weakness. "Wait, who is she?" someone murmured. "I thought she was just a regular passenger." But the phrase, "just a passenger," no longer held any weight. Security violations, incorrect flagging, document tampering, baseless accusations, these were no longer operational errors. They were financial liabilities, and the woman they had dismissed was no longer anonymous. Autumn was now the final verifier of a multi-billion-dollar transaction, one that, if not signed within 72 hours, would void Havenport's exclusive acquisition clause, in place since early this year. The issue wasn't that she held power. The issue was they acted as if she didn't. 9:04 IEM. A call from Genesis headquarters was placed to Havenport's legal division. The voice on the line, male, firm, icy. "We've been informed that Ms. Autumn Riley was flagged under your passenger monitoring system for behavioral concerns. Effective immediately, Genesis Financial Holdings is halting all capital adjustment procedures until an internal risk memorandum and accountability resolution are submitted. Furthermore, we confirm she is the lead voting shareholder on the anonymized Genesis Trust investment. The line went dead before a reply could be made. One of Havenport's senior financial officers dropped his pen. It's her, the one they said would never show up. Until she did, the legal advisor replied, voice low. Back at the terminal, Autumn received the notification she had expected. Risk status override confirmed. Genesis Holdings sync request pending signature. She tapped defer. Not yet. Not here. First, she wanted to see whether they would act on their own. Her phone buzzed again. This time the ID was encrypted but familiar. L. Westbrook, Chief Strategy Officer, Haven, Port Air. She declined the call, let them feel the weight of being denied access, just as they had made her feel all morning. She walked slowly toward the East Wing Lounge, where senior operations teams typically convened during mergers. She passed through biometric security without needing to stop. The glass doors opened. She stepped into the executive conference room. Inside, 3 people were already seated. No one spoke. No one dared admit they'd been tracking her location since the moment her name reappeared in the system. The man in the middle, Leonard Westbrook himself, was the first to stand. He tried to muster grace, a quality that had never worked on someone like Autumn. "That's Miss Riley," Leonard said cautiously. "Thank you for coming. We deeply regret what happened this morning. We'd like to make it right." Autumn sat down without being invited. She placed the file on the table and opened it, not to negotiate, but to show them their future. "What happened wasn't a mistake," she said. "It was a mirror. You've built a system that reflects the biases of the people running it. I simply presented a face you didn't expect." Leonard leaned forward, his expression tightening. "We didn't know you were flying today. If we had, then you would have treated me differently," Autumn interrupted. "Exactly. And that's the problem." No one interrupted her now. No one dared. She pulled out a second document bearing the embossed seal of Genesis Holdings, signed by 3 trust administrators. "This is the contingency hold on the asset absorption plan. If not rescinded by end of day, your fiscal quarter collapses. Our partners will pull every hedge fund position. Your stock will tank by the weekend." Leonard swallowed hard. "And your signature controls that?" "Yes," Autumn said. "And so far, I see no reason to sign." The screen behind her lit up with a new alert. "Audit system update. First flagged entity, Havenport staff, Terminal C." Autumn tapped the tablet. The dashboard expanded. Not a static report, but a live audit feed connected to the internal security system at Terminal C and Cabin 4447. The audit program, quietly activated by her 15 minutes earlier, had pulled data from gate logs, crew comms, scanners, and in-light cameras. Footage loaded quickly. Sloan walking past Autumn's row, skipping her with the towels, smirking after speaking with a passenger in row 5, then whispering into her wrist mic just moments before Autumn was flagged for movement. The footage didn't accuse, it confirmed. On another screen, the check-in agent who redirected Autumn to economy was shown glancing at her name, then waving the ticket through without scanning. The system logged it as non-action. They didn't know that in that moment, the system was watching them, just as they had watched her. But now, those eyes no longer reported to them, they reported to her. At the administrative wing of the airport, the phone on Lisa Halverson's desk rang. Head of Employee Ethics and Compliance Oversight, she picked up on the second ring, already braced. "Yes," she listened for 6 seconds, then stood abruptly. Who's she?" The voice on the other end said what she never expected to hear. "Genesis." Lisa asked nothing else. She grabbed a file and sent the first alert. "Emergency compliance review. All personnel from Flight 447 to report to Operations Room 6A. Full uniform required." At Gate C12, Sloan was in mid-coordination, adjusting the bridge for the next boarding, when her wrist mic vibrated. Sloane Carter, report immediately to the administrative wing. Priority code level 3. She blinked, slightly confused, then looked up. Her shift supervisor was already walking toward her. Now, he said firmly, bring your shift log. Sloane walked off without protest, but her pulse had already quickened. Elsewhere, Tranta, the check-in supervisor who directed Autumn to economy without scanning her ticket, was in the middle of managing international transit passengers when he was abruptly logged out of the system. A red warning screen appeared. Access restricted pending compliance investigation. Seconds later, the landline beside him rang. His manager on the other end didn't bother with greetings. Operations room 6A. Bring your terminal activity log. You've been pulled from shift. Every morning, they had to check in at regional gates, assigned to greet passengers crammed into economy cabins. The kind who never asked for scented towels or special meals, because they'd never known such things existed, and it was enough for them to understand. Power can be silent, yet still absolute. Sloane read the memo during her break, seated in the employee lounge at the far end of Terminal F, where domestic crews waited between flights. Her uniform was still crisp, her posture still correct, but her face, no longer confident, it betrayed the truth. She wasn't angry, she was stunned. Somewhere deep down, she must have believed it wouldn't go this far, that the woman she once dismissed would simply disappear, or tolerate it, or forgive it, that her own actions would once again slip into the system, buried in routine like so many times before, but not this time, because the passenger that day didn't need to shout to be heard. She only needed patience for the system to hear itself. Autumn never sought Sloane out. She didn't need confrontation, but fate or consequence arranged one final meeting. As Sloane approached Gate B8 for her first reassigned flight to Milwaukee, Autumn was finishing a call at the executive service desk. She recognized the uniform first, then the person wearing it. He didn't stare, but as Sloane passed within a meter, their eyes met. In that shared breath of space, 1,000 unspoken truths tightened between them. Sloane slowed, didn't stop, but just enough to acknowledge the moment. Autumn stepped forward, not fast, not aggressive, just present, in a way that parted the air around her. You once said something to me, Autumn began, her voice low, steady, unshaken. On the plane, Sloane blinked, paused. You said I didn't belong. In first class, Autumn continued, that I didn't look the part. Sloane swallowed, her throat moving once. I'm not angry, Autumn went on, her gaze direct, her voice soft, like velvet wrapped around a blade. Because you were right, I didn't belong in first class. Sloane's brow knit, confused. Because I wasn't there to sit in it, Autumn finished. I was there to buy it. No echo. None needed. The words fell into the silence between them, light as air, heavier than any accusation. Sloane didn't respond. She couldn't. She just stood there, every protocol she'd been trained to follow turning to ash. Autumn didn't wait. She turned, picked up her case, and walked toward the north wing of the terminal, toward the private exit where her executive car was waiting. She didn't need to board a flight. She was no longer a passenger. She was preparing for the next board meeting. Behind her, Sloane remained still, hands rigid at her sides, mouth slightly parted as if to say, I'm sorry. But the words had nowhere to go. The terminal was still crowded, still loud. But to Sloane, the silence Autumn left behind said everything. No yelling, no expose. Just structure, weighted consequences. And the fact that, starting today, the woman she tried to sideline now decided the very routes Sloane would never serve again. Upstairs, in an executive office overlooking runway 2R, a meeting was underway. The blinds were only partially drawn, but the tension inside was unmistakable. A few people spoke into phones. Others reviewed printed reports titled, Level 1 Shareholder Review, Strictly Confidential. At the head of the table, the CEO of Havenport sat wordless, his face pale. An assistant placed 2 final documents in front of him. One was an internal investigation summary. The other contained just a single line. from Genesis Holdings. Shareholder Autumn Riley has elected to proceed with the merger under revised compliance terms. Execution is effective immediately. No fanfare, no speech, just justice arriving like a delayed flight, unavoidable, undeniable, and echoing quietly through every corridor it passed. If this story made you pause, reflect, or feel something deeper, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss more stories that dare to challenge what we often accept as normal. What moment struck you the most? Was there a turning point you didn't see coming? And most importantly, where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below, because your perspective always matters.